Sarah Martinez looked at the clock on the kitchen wall. It was only 6 in the evening, but her feet already hurt. She had been working at the Grand Bistro for 3 months now, and every day felt longer than the last. The fancy restaurant was nothing like the small cafe where she used to work. Here, everything had to be perfect. The glasses had to shine. The tables had to be spotless. And the customers expected her to smile even when they were rude. She wiped down another table and sighed. The white tablecloth was smooth and clean, just like the restaurant owner wanted. Mr. Peterson was a nice man, but he was very strict about keeping things perfect. Sarah understood why. The Grand Bistro was expensive, and rich people came here to eat. They paid a lot of money for their meals, so everything had to look fancy. Sarah was 22 years old, but she felt much older. Working 2 jobs was hard. She worked at the restaurant in the evenings and cleaned offices early in the morning. She barely had time to sleep, but she needed the money. Every dollar she made went into a special jar in her small apartment. She was saving for something very important. The piano music school had been her dream since she was a little girl. She had worked so hard to get accepted. For 3 years, she studied there and learned to play beautiful music. Her teacher said she was very talented. They said she could become a great pianist someday, but then something terrible happened. The school ran out of money and had to cut many programs. Sarah's scholarship was gone. She remembered the day she got the letter. She was so excited to open it, thinking it would tell her about her classes for the final year. Instead, it said the school could not help her anymore. She would have to pay for her last semester herself. The cost was $15,000. For Sarah, who grew up in a poor family, it might as well have been $1 million. That night, she cried for hours. All her dreams seemed to disappear in one moment. She thought about giving up. Maybe she could find a different job and forget about music. But when she woke up the next morning, she made a decision. She would find a way to pay for school herself. She would work as many jobs as needed. She would save every penny until she had enough money. The Grand Bistro was her second job. She found it after working at the office cleaning job for 2 months. The pay was better than most restaurants, and sometimes customers left good tips. Sarah was grateful for the work. Even though it was hard. As she worked, Sarah often looked at the beautiful grand piano in the center of the restaurant. It was black and shiny, and it looked very expensive. The piano sat on a small stage with soft lights around it. But nobody ever played it. Mr. Peterson told her it was just for decoration. He said it made the restaurant look more elegant. Every time Sarah saw the piano, her heart hurt a little. She missed playing so much. At home, she had a small keyboard, but it was not the same. The keys were plastic, and they did not feel right. Sometimes she would put her hands on the keyboard and try to remember her favorite pieces, but it made her too sad. Sarah had been playing piano since she was 7 years old. Her grandmother had an old piano in her house, and Sarah loved to touch the keys. Her grandmother taught her simple songs at first. Then Sarah started taking lessons at school. Her teacher said she had a natural gift. She could hear music in her head and make her fingers play exactly what she heard. In high school, Sarah won many competitions. She played in concerts and everyone clapped for her. Her parents were so proud. They worked extra jobs to pay for her piano lessons, even though they did not have much money. When Sarah got the scholarship to music school, the whole family celebrated. It felt like all their hard work had paid off. Now Sarah worked 12 hours a day and fell asleep exhausted every night. Her hands, which used to be soft from only touching piano keys, were now rough and dry from cleaning and carrying heavy trays. Sometimes she looked at her hands and wanted to cry. These were the hands that used to make beautiful music. Now they only wiped tables and washed dishes. The other workers at the restaurant knew about Sarah's music background. Maria, the other waitress, often asked her about piano playing. Tony, the cook, sometimes hummed and asked Sarah if she knew them. They were kind to her and tried to make her feel better when she looked sad, but the customers did not know anything about Sarah's dreams. To them, she was just a waitress. Some were nice and said please and thank you. Others acted like she was invisible. A few were very rude and complained about everything. Sarah had learned to smile and be polite no matter how people treated her. She needed this job too much to lose it. The worst customers were the very rich ones. They came in wearing expensive clothes and jewelry. They drove fancy cars and talked loudly about their money. Many of them looked at Sarah like she was not important. Some snapped their fingers at her like she was a dog. Others made jokes about her accent or the way she looked. Sarah tried not to let it bother her. She told herself that these people did not know her story. They did not know that she was educated and talented. They only saw a young woman serving their food. She kept her dreams private and did her work quietly. Every night before bed, Sarah counted the money in her jar. She had saved $4,000 so far. It was a lot of money for her, but she still needed $11,000 more. At this rate, it would take her almost 2 years to save enough. She worried that the music school might not let her come back after such a long break. But she had to try. Sometimes Sarah dreamed about playing piano again. In her dreams, she sat at a beautiful grand piano like the one in the restaurant. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys, playing the most difficult pieces perfectly. People listened and clapped. In her dreams, she was not a waitress. She was a musician, but then she would wake up to her alarm clock at 5 in the morning. She had to get ready for her cleaning job. The dreams felt so real that waking up was always painful. Reality hit her hard every day. Sarah knew that many people would think she was crazy. Why work so hard for a dream that might never come true? Why not just find a regular job and live a normal life? But Sarah could not give up. Music was not just something she did. It was part of who she was. Without it, she felt empty. As she finished cleaning the last table, Sarah looked at the piano one more time. Tomorrow she would come back and work another long shift. She would serve food to people who did not see her as a real person. She would smile when she felt like crying. But she would also be one day closer to her dream. The restaurant was getting ready for the dinner rush. More customers would come. Soon, Sarah tied her apron tighter and got ready for another evening of hard work. She did not know that this night would change her life forever. The black limousine pulled up in front of the Grand Bistro at exactly 7:30. The driver jumped out and opened the back door. Marcus Rothwell stepped out first, straightening his expensive suit jacket. He was a tall man with gray hair and cold blue eyes. Everything about him screamed money and power. His shoes probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. Marcus owned half the buildings in the city. He bought old neighborhoods, tore them down, and built expensive condos. He made millions of dollars this way, but he also made many families lose their homes. Marcus did not care about that. He only cared about making more money and showing everyone how important he was. Tonight was special for Marcus. He had just closed the biggest deal of his career. He bought a huge piece of land near the waterfront where he planned to build luxury apartments. The deal would make him even richer than before. To celebrate, he invited his business partners and their wives to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in town. 3 more expensive cars arrived after the limousine. Marcus's business partners got out with their wives. There was Robert Chun, who owned a chain of hotels. His wife, Linda, wore a dress that sparkled with diamonds. Then came David Walsh, a banker who helped Marcus get loans for his projects. His wife, Jennifer, had on so much jewelry that she clinked when she walked. The last to arrive was Thomas Parker, a lawyer who helped Marcus with his contracts. His wife, Susan, looked nervous. She did not like these business dinners, but her husband made her come anyway. All the wives smiled and acted happy, but Sarah could tell they were not comfortable. They knew their husbands could be mean to people who worked in restaurants. Marcus loved being the center of attention. As they walked into the restaurant, he talked loudly about his new deal. He wanted everyone to hear how smart and successful he was. The other customers looked at him, which made him even happier. Marcus believed that everyone should admire him. Mr. Peterson, the restaurant owner, hurried over to greet them. He knew Marcus was very rich and always spent a lot of money when he came. Mr. Peterson smiled his biggest smile and shook Marcus's hand. "Mr. Rothwell, how wonderful to see you again," Mr. Peterson said. "We have your favorite table ready." Marcus nodded like he expected this treatment. He looked around the restaurant to make sure other people were watching. He wanted them to see how important he was. The group followed Mr. Peterson to a large round table in the center of the dining room. It was right next to the piano, which made Marcus feel even more special. Sarah was in the kitchen when Maria told her about the new customers. "Be careful with table 7, Maria warned. "That man in the expensive suit looks like trouble. I served him once before, and he was very rude." Sarah nodded and took a deep breath. She had learned to deal with difficult customers before. She picked up her notepad and walked toward their table. As she got closer, she could hear Marcus talking loudly about money and power. The other people at the table laughed at everything. He said, even when it was not funny. "Good evening," Sarah said politely when she reached their table. "Welcome to the Grand Bistro. Can I start you with some drinks tonight?" Marcus looked up at her with annoyed eyes. He did not like being interrupted when he was talking about himself. He looked Sarah up and down like she was not worth his time. The other people at the table became quiet and uncomfortable. "What do you recommend?" Marcus asked in a voice that sounded like he was testing her. Sarah had memorized the wine list to help. "Customers make good choices. We have a wonderful selection of wines tonight. The 2015 Bordeaux is very popular, or if you prefer something lighter, the Pinot Grigio is excellent." Marcus made a face like Sarah had said something stupid. "Do you even know what a good wine tastes like?" he asked. "I doubt someone like you could afford to drink anything better than cheap beer." The comment hurt, but Sarah kept her smile. "I'll give you a few more minutes to decide," she said calmly. "No, wait," Marcus said loudly. "Bring us your most expensive bottle of wine. And make sure it's properly chilled. I don't want some warm bottle that's been sitting around." Sarah wrote down the order. The wine he wanted cost $300. That was more money than she made in a week. "Of course, sir." "I'll bring that right out." As Sarah walked away, she heard Marcus laughing with his friends. "Did you see her face when I asked about wine?" he said. "These people have no idea about the finer things in life." Sarah's face felt hot with embarrassment, but she kept walking. In the kitchen, she told Tony about the wine order. Tony shook his head. "That guy thinks money makes him better than everyone else," he said. "Don't let him get to you, Sarah. You're worth 10 of him." Sarah appreciated Tony's kindness, but the words still hurt. She had actually studied wine in her restaurant training classes. She knew more about wine than most customers. But Marcus did not care about that. He only saw a young waitress he could look down on. When Sarah brought the wine to the table, Marcus made a big show of tasting it. He swirled it in his glass and smelled it like he was an expert. The truth was, Marcus knew very little about wine. He just ordered expensive bottles to impress people. "This will do," he said finally, like he was doing Sarah a favor by accepting. The evening got worse from there. Marcus complained about everything Sarah did. When she filled his water glass, he said it was too full. When she brought the bread basket, he said the bread was not warm enough. When she explained the menu items, he interrupted her and said she was talking too slowly. The worst part was that Marcus's friends laughed at everything he said. They were afraid to stand up to him because they needed his business deals to make money. Their wives looked embarrassed, but they did not say anything either. They just sat quietly and let Marcus be cruel. Sarah tried her best to stay professional. She brought their food quickly and made sure everything was perfect. But nothing she did was good enough for Marcus. He sent back the appetizer because he said the plate was dirty. It was not dirty, but Sarah brought a new one anyway. The other customers in the restaurant started to notice. They could hear Marcus's loud voice complaining about the service. Some people looked sorry for Sarah. Others seemed uncomfortable and wished Marcus would stop making such a scene. By the time they ordered dessert, Sarah's hands were shaking. She had never been treated so badly by a customer. Marcus seemed to enjoy making her feel small. Every time she came to the table, he found something new to criticize. "This girl clearly doesn't belong in a nice restaurant like this," Marcus said loudly to his table. "She should probably be working at some cheap diner instead." The comment was meant to be heard by everyone nearby. Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She could not cry in front of the customers. She needed this job too much. As Sarah served their dessert, she accidentally brushed against the back of Marcus's chair. It was barely a touch, but Marcus acted like she had attacked him. "Watch where you're going," he shouted loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "Are you blind or just careless?" The restaurant became very quiet. Everyone stopped eating and looked at their table. Sarah's face turned red with shame. She had been so careful all evening, but this one tiny mistake gave Marcus the excuse he was looking for. Marcus stood up from his chair, making the moment even more dramatic. He wanted everyone in the restaurant to see what he was about to do. His eyes were mean and cold. Sarah could tell that something terrible was about to happen. The piano sat just a few feet away, silent and beautiful. Sarah had looked at it so many times during the evening, wishing she could touch the keys. She had no idea that in just a few minutes that piano would change her life forever. Marcus smiled a cruel smile. He had an idea that he thought would be very funny. He was about to humiliate Sarah in front of everyone, or so he thought. But Marcus had no idea who he was really dealing with. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Marcus Rothwell stood tall next to his table, looking around the restaurant like a king addressing his subjects. Every person in the Grand Bistro was watching him now. The quiet dining room felt heavy with tension. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died. Even the kitchen staff peeked out to see what was happening. Sarah stood frozen next to Marcus's chair, her serving tray trembling slightly in her hands. She had accidentally touched his chair while serving dessert, but it was such a small thing. Any normal person would have ignored it or maybe said, "Excuse me," politely. But Marcus was not a normal person. He was a man who enjoyed making others feel small, especially when he had an audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced loudly, his voice carrying across the entire restaurant, "I want everyone to see what passes for service in this so-called fine establishment." Mr. Peterson heard the commotion from his office and rushed out. His face went pale when he saw Marcus standing and making a scene. The restaurant owner knew that one bad review from a rich customer like Marcus could hurt his business badly. Rich people talked to other rich people, and bad news traveled fast. "Mr. Rothwell, please," Mr. Peterson said quietly, trying to calm the situation. "I'm sure we can resolve whatever the problem is." Marcus waved his hand dismissively. "The problem is that your staff don't know how to behave around people of quality," he said. His business partners looked uncomfortable, but none of them spoke up. They needed Marcus for their own deals, so they stayed quiet even though they knew he was being cruel. Sarah's coworker Maria started to step forward to help, but Tony the cook grabbed her arm. "Don't make it worse," he whispered. "Let it play out." They both felt terrible for Sarah, but they knew that challenging a customer like Marcus could get them all fired. Marcus turned his attention back to Sarah, who was still standing beside his table. Her face was red with embarrassment, but she kept her eyes down and tried to stay calm. She had dealt with rude customers before, but never anything like this public humiliation. "This waitress has been incompetent all evening," Marcus continued, speaking to the whole restaurant like he was giving a speech. "She doesn't know good wine from cheap wine. She can't serve food without bumping into people. She clearly doesn't belong in a restaurant of this caliber." Some of the other customers looked away, embarrassed for Sarah. Others watched with curious eyes, wondering how far Marcus would go. An elderly couple at a corner table shook their heads in disgust at Marcus's behavior, but they did not say anything. Sarah felt like she was shrinking with every word Marcus spoke. All her dreams and hard work seemed so small in this moment. She thought about the money jar in her apartment and the piano lessons she was saving for. Would she lose her job because of this? Would her dreams die tonight? Marcus was enjoying himself. Now he had everyone's attention and he felt powerful. He looked around the room to make sure people were still watching. Then his eyes fell on the grand piano just a few feet away. The beautiful black instrument sat there silent and elegant, its polished surface reflecting the restaurant's soft lights. A cruel smile spread across Marcus's face. He had just thought of the perfect way to humiliate Sarah even more. He pointed at the piano with a dramatic gesture. "Look at that," he said loudly. "Our clumsy waitress keeps staring at that piano. I bet she thinks she's some kind of musician." He laughed, and his business partners felt like they had to laugh too, even. Though they looked uncomfortable, Sarah's heart stopped. How did he know she looked at the piano? Had he been watching her all evening? She felt exposed and vulnerable, like Marcus could see right through her. "Yes, I've been watching you," Marcus continued, reading the surprise on her face. "Every time you walk by that piano, you stare at it like you want to touch it. Do you think you can play, little waitress? Do you have secret dreams of being a musician?" The restaurant was completely silent now. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. This was her worst nightmare coming true. Her private dreams were being mocked in front of everyone. Marcus walked over to the piano and patted it like it was a pet. "This is a very expensive instrument," he announced. "It probably costs more than this girl makes in 5 years. But I bet she thinks she could just sit down and play it like some kind of concert pianist." He turned back to Sarah with mock concern in his voice. "Tell me, dear, what song do you think you could play? Do you know Chopsticks? That's probably too difficult for someone like you." The other customers were becoming more uncomfortable by the minute. Some whispered to each other about how cruel Marcus was being. Others looked at their plates, wishing they were somewhere else, but nobody stood up to stop him. Sarah's hands were shaking now. She wanted to run away and hide, but her feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. All her life, she had been taught to be polite and respectful to customers no matter how they treated her. But this was beyond anything she had ever experienced. Marcus was not finished. He was having too much fun to stop now. "I have an idea," he announced with fake enthusiasm. "Why don't we all enjoy some entertainment tonight? I'm sure our musical waitress would love to show us her talents." He gestured toward the piano bench like he was inviting Sarah to sit. "Go ahead," he said in a voice dripping with sarcasm. "Play us a song. Show everyone what a talented musician you are." His business partners shifted in their seats. Even they thought Marcus was going too far now. David Walsh's wife Jennifer looked like she wanted to say something, but her husband gave her a warning look. Robert Chun stared at his dessert, wishing he had not come to dinner tonight. Sarah looked at the piano, then at Marcus, then at all the people watching her. She felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. Part of her wanted to run to the kitchen and hide. Part of her wanted to quit her job right there and never come back. But then something strange happened. As Sarah looked at the piano, she remembered why she was working so hard. She remembered her grandmother teaching her first songs. She remembered winning competitions in high school. She remembered her teachers saying she had real talent. She remembered all the hours she had practiced, all the dreams she had never given up on. Marcus was still talking, making more jokes about her musical abilities. But Sarah was not listening anymore. She was looking at the piano and thinking about everything it represented. This beautiful instrument was exactly like the ones she used to play in school. It was the same type of piano where she had performed her best pieces. The other restaurant workers watched with worry. They could see something changing in Sarah's expression. Maria bit her lip, hoping Sarah would not do anything that would get her fired. Tony clenched his fists, angry that he could not help her. Mr. Peterson looked back and forth between Sarah and Marcus, trying to figure out how to end this nightmare. He liked Sarah and thought she was a good worker, but he also needed to keep his wealthy customers happy. Marcus raised his voice even louder. "What's wrong?" he asked Sarah mockingly. "Too scared to show us your musical skills? Don't worry, we don't expect much. Maybe you can play Mary Had a Little Lamb with one finger." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Sarah felt something click inside her mind. She was tired of being treated like she was not important. She was tired of hiding who she really was. She was tired of letting people like Marcus think they were better than her just because they had more money. Sarah looked directly at Marcus for the first time all evening. Her eyes were no longer afraid. There was something new there, Something that made Marcus pause for just a moment. It was determination. It was strength. It was the look of someone who had made a decision. Actually, Sarah said in a quiet but clear voice, I would like to take my break now. The words surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. She had not planned to say them. They just came out. But once she said them, she knew there was no going back. Mr. Peterson looked confused. This was not how he expected the situation to end. Sarah, you don't need to, he started to say, but Sarah was already walking toward Mr. Peterson. May I please take my 15-minute break now? She asked politely. Her voice was steady and calm. Marcus laughed loudly. Oh, this is perfect, he said. She's actually going to do it. Everyone watched closely. This should be very entertaining. Sarah did not look at Marcus. She kept her eyes on Mr. Peterson, waiting for his answer. The restaurant owner looked around at all the watching faces. He could see that his customers were uncomfortable with the whole situation. Maybe letting Sarah sit at the piano for a few minutes would end this nightmare. Of course, Mr. Peterson said quietly. Take your break. Sarah nodded and began walking toward the piano. With each step, she felt more confident. This was her moment. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed about, had led to this. She was not just a waitress anymore. She was about to show everyone who she really was. Marcus rubbed his hands together with glee. He thought he was about to witness the most embarrassing moment of someone's life. He had no idea that he was about to be proven very, very wrong. Sarah walked slowly toward the grand piano, her server's apron still tied around her waist. Every eye in the restaurant followed her movement. The silence was so complete that her footsteps seemed to echo in the large dining room. She could feel the weight of everyone's expectations, but strangely, she was no longer nervous. As she approached the beautiful instrument, Sarah felt like she was coming home. The piano was a Steinway Grand, the same type she had played during her best performances at music school. Its black surface was polished to perfection, and the keys looked like they had barely been touched. She could almost hear the music waiting inside it. Marcus continued to chuckle behind her. This is going to be better than dinner and a show, he said to his table. I can't wait to hear what masterpiece our little waitress has prepared for us. His business partners smiled weakly, but their wives looked increasingly uncomfortable. With his cruelty, Sarah reached the piano bench and paused for a moment. She ran her fingers lightly along the edge of the keyboard, feeling the smooth ivory keys under her fingertips. It had been 3 months since she had touched a real piano. Her small keyboard at home was nothing like this magnificent instrument. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly, just like she had done hundreds of times before. The motion felt natural and familiar. She placed her feet on the pedals and felt their weight under her shoes. Everything about this moment felt right. The restaurant remained completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to watch. Maria stood in the doorway with her hands clasped together, hoping and praying that Sarah knew what she was doing. Tony watched from behind the service counter, his face full of worry and hope. Marcus was still talking, but his voice seemed to fade into the background. Sarah was entering a different world now, the world where music lived. She closed her eyes for just a moment and thought about what piece to play. She could choose something simple and safe, just to get through this moment without embarrassing herself, but then she thought about all the times people had underestimated her. She thought about Marcus's cruel words and his assumption that she was just a simple waitress with no talent or education. She thought about all the customers who looked through her like she was invisible. Most of all, she thought about her dreams, and how hard she had worked to get this far. Sarah opened her eyes and placed her hands on the keys. She knew exactly what piece she was going to play. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most challenging pieces in all of classical piano literature. It was a piece that separated real pianists from pretenders. It was a piece that required years of training and natural talent to perform properly. She had performed this piece during her junior recital at music school. Her professor had chosen it specifically because it would showcase her technical skills and musical maturity. It was not a piece that someone could fake their way through. Either you could play it or you could not. There was no middle ground. Sarah took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes rang out clear and pure. They were soft at first, like a whisper, but perfectly controlled. The melody was haunting and beautiful, each note placed exactly where it belonged. Within the first few measures, it became obvious that this was not amateur playing. Marcus's laughter died in his throat. His mouth fell open slightly as he heard the quality of the music coming from the piano. This was not what he had expected. At all. The other people at his table stopped their quiet conversations and turned to listen. Sarah's fingers moved across the keys with impossible grace and precision. The piece began to build in complexity, with rapid runs and intricate harmonies that would challenge even professional pianists. But Sarah played them effortlessly, like she was having a conversation with an old friend. The entire restaurant was. Transfixed, forks were set down mid-bite. Conversations stopped completely. People turned in their chairs to get a better view of the young woman at the piano. Some customers who had been preparing to leave sat back down, unwilling to miss what was happening. As the piece continued, Sarah's playing became more intense and emotional. Her whole body moved with the music, her shoulders swaying gently as her hands danced across the keyboard. Years of training and natural talent poured out through her fingertips. This was not just technical skill on display. This was artistry. At its highest level, an elderly man sitting at a corner table began to lean forward, his eyes wide with recognition. He was Dr. James Chun, a retired music professor who had spent his life around talented musicians. He knew immediately that he was witnessing something extraordinary. This young woman was not just playing the notes correctly. She was interpreting the music with a maturity and depth that most pianists twice her age could not achieve. The piece moved into its most difficult section, where rapid scales and complex chord progressions tested the limits of human capability. Sarah's hands flew across the keys so fast they seemed to blur, but every note was crystal clear and perfectly timed. She made the impossible look effortless. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, his face growing redder by the minute. He had expected to humiliate a simple waitress and instead found himself listening to a performance that belonged in a concert hall. His business partners stared at him with confused expressions, wondering how he could have been so wrong about this young woman. The other restaurant workers were equally amazed. Maria had tears in her eyes as she watched her friend transform before everyone's eyes. Tony stood with his mouth open, unable to believe what he was hearing. Even Mr. Peterson, who had known Sarah was musical, had no idea she possessed this level of talent. Sarah was completely lost in the music now. The restaurant, the customers, even Marcus's cruel words faded away. There was only the piano and the beautiful sound it was creating under her hands. This was why she worked 2 jobs and saved every penny. This was why she could not give up on her dreams. Music was not just something she did. It was who she was. The piece reached its emotional climax, where all the technical difficulties served the greater purpose of expressing deep human feelings. Sarah's face showed the intensity of the music. She was not just playing notes on a page. She was telling a story about struggle and triumph, about dreams that refused to die, about the power of beauty in an often cruel world. Customers at nearby tables began to lean forward, drawn in by the power of the performance. Some had tears in their eyes. Others sat with expressions of wonder, as if they were witnessing something miraculous. The music seemed to fill every corner of the restaurant, transforming the entire space into something magical. Dr. Chun slowly stood up from his table, unable to remain seated during such an extraordinary performance. He recognized the piece, of course, and he knew how difficult it was to play well. But this young woman was not just playing it well. She was playing it brilliantly, with a level of skill and musicality that he rarely heard even in professional concerts. The piece moved toward its conclusion, building to a powerful and emotional ending. Sarah's hands covered the entire range of the keyboard, from the deepest bass notes to the highest treble. The sound was rich and full, like an entire orchestra compressed into a single instrument. Every person in the restaurant felt the music. In their chest, in their hearts, in their souls. As the final notes rang out, Sarah held her hands above the keys for just a moment, letting the last sounds fade naturally. The silence that followed was profound and complete. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The beautiful music seemed to hang in the air like a blessing. Then, slowly, the spell was broken. Dr. Chun began to clap, his hands coming together in slow, deliberate applause. The sound seemed to wake everyone else from their trance. One by one, other customers joined in the applause. Then more and more, until the entire restaurant was clapping enthusiastically. Sarah sat at the piano bench, suddenly aware of where she was again. She looked around at all the faces staring at her with amazement and respect. These were the same people who had watched Marcus humiliate her just minutes before. Now they were looking at her like she was someone completely different, because she was someone completely different. She was not just a waitress anymore. She was a musician, an artist, a young woman with extraordinary talent and determination. The music had revealed her true self to everyone in the room. Including herself. Marcus sat at his table in stunned silence, his face white with shock and embarrassment. He had tried to humiliate this young woman, and instead had revealed his own ignorance and cruelty. Everyone in the restaurant now knew exactly what kind of person he really was. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Sarah sat at the piano bench, overwhelmed by the response from everyone in the restaurant. She had poured her heart and soul into that performance, and the audience could feel every emotion she had expressed through the music. Some people were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were shaking their heads in amazement. Dr. James Chun was the first to stand up completely. The elderly man walked slowly toward the piano, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. There was something about his careful, respectful approach that made the other customers quiet down to watch. He moved like someone who understood the importance of what had just happened. "Excuse me, young lady," Dr. Chun said in a gentle voice as he reached the piano. "That was absolutely extraordinary. May I ask where you studied?" Sarah stood up from the bench, suddenly feeling shy again. The confidence she had felt while playing was fading, replaced by uncertainty about what would happen next. "I studied at the Metropolitan Music Conservatory," she said quietly, "but I had to stop for financial reasons." Dr. Chun's eyes widened with recognition. "You're Sarah Martinez," he said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "I remember. You won the Young Artists competition 3 years ago. Your performance of the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto was remarkable." Sarah could not believe that this stranger remembered her from so long ago. "You were there?" she asked in amazement. "I was one of the judges," Dr. Chun replied with a warm smile. "I'm James Chun, director of the Chun Foundation for Musical Arts. I've been looking for talented young musicians to support, and I never forgot your performance that day. I always wondered what happened to you." The conversation between Sarah and Dr. Chun was happening in front of the entire restaurant. Other customers moved closer to hear what was being said. Even the kitchen staff had come out to listen. Everyone seemed to understand that they were witnessing something special. "What you just played," Dr. Chun continued, "shows that your talent has only grown stronger. That interpretation of the Chopin was at a professional level. Have you been able to continue your studies at all?" Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "No, sir. I've been working 2 jobs to try to save money for my final semester. I need $11,000 more before I can go back to school." Dr. Chun looked shocked. "You mean to tell me that a musician of your caliber has been unable to complete her education because of money? This is exactly the kind of situation my foundation was created to address." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "Miss Martinez, I would like to offer you a full scholarship to complete your degree, plus a position as a teaching assistant with my foundation. You could start classes again next month if you're interested." Sarah stared at the business card like it was made of gold. After months of exhausting work and worry, Someone was offering her exactly what she had been dreaming of. She could barely believe it was real. "Are you serious?" she whispered, afraid that she might be imagining the whole conversation. "Completely serious," Dr. Chun replied firmly. "Talent like yours should not be wasted because of financial problems. Music needs artists like you." The restaurant erupted in applause again. Customers who had been strangers just minutes before were now cheering for Sarah's good fortune. Even some of the people at Marcus's table looked happy for her, though they were careful not to show it too openly. But Dr. Chun was not the only person who wanted to help Sarah. A well-dressed woman approached from another table, introducing herself as Rebecca Stone, a talent agent who represented classical musicians. She had heard the performance and was immediately interested in working with Sarah. "I handle bookings for some of the best concert halls in the country," Rebecca explained. "With training like you'll get from Dr. Chun's foundation, I could have you performing professionally within 2 years. Would you be interested in discussing representation?" Sarah felt like she was dreaming. An hour ago, she had been just a waitress, being humiliated by a cruel customer. Now she had scholarship offers and talk of professional concerts. It was almost too much to process. More people approached with offers and opportunities. The owner of a local music venue wanted to book her for special events. A music teacher offered to give her free private lessons. Several wealthy customers quietly slipped her their business cards, whispering about potential sponsorship opportunities. Throughout all of this excitement, Marcus Rothwell sat at his table in complete silence. His face had gone from red with anger to pale with embarrassment. His business partners were looking at him with disgust and disappointment. They had always known he could be difficult, but his treatment of Sarah had revealed a cruelty that made them uncomfortable. David Walsh, the banker, was the first to speak up. "Marcus, I think we should discuss postponing our partnership. I'm not sure our companies share the same values." His wife Jennifer nodded in agreement, her face showing clear disapproval of Marcus's behavior. Robert Chun, the hotel owner, stood up from the table. "I'm going home," he announced. "This evening has been educational, but not in the way I expected." His wife Linda gathered her purse quickly, eager to leave. Thomas Parker, the lawyer, looked around nervously. He needed Marcus's business, but he could see that staying associated with him might hurt his reputation. "Perhaps we should all think about tonight's events," he said carefully. One by one, Marcus's dinner companions made excuses and left the restaurant. Within 10 minutes, he was sitting alone at the large table, surrounded by empty chairs and unfinished desserts. The man who had started the evening feeling powerful and important was now completely isolated. Mr. Peterson, the restaurant owner, approached Marcus's table cautiously. He had watched the entire evening unfold and was amazed by what had happened. He was also angry about how his employee had been treated. "Mr. Rothwell," Mr. Peterson said in a calm but firm voice, "I think it would be best if you settled your bill and left. Sarah is one of my most valued employees, and I cannot allow customers to treat my staff the way you treated her tonight." Marcus looked up at Mr. Peterson with shocked eyes. He was not used to being spoken to this way, especially by someone he considered beneath his social status. But he could see that everyone in the restaurant was watching him, and none of them looked friendly. "Do you know who I am?" Marcus asked, trying to regain some of his earlier confidence. "Yes," Mr. Peterson replied simply. "You're someone who is no longer welcome in my restaurant." Marcus threw his napkin on the table and stood up angrily. But as he looked around the dining room, he realized that his anger meant nothing here. Everyone was still focused on Sarah and her incredible performance. Nobody cared about his wounded pride or his threats. He paid his enormous bill without saying another word and walked out of the restaurant alone. The limousine that had brought him was still waiting outside, but it felt different now. Instead of being a symbol of his success, it felt like a lonely reminder of how isolated he had become. Back inside the restaurant, Sarah was still surrounded by people offering help and opportunities. Dr. Chun was explaining the details of the scholarship program. Rebecca Stone was discussing potential performance venues. Other customers were sharing their own stories about music and dreams. Maria and Tony finally had a chance to reach Sarah through the crowd of well-wishers. Both of them had tears in their eyes as they hugged their friend. "I knew you were special," Maria said. "But I had no idea you were this talented. I'm so proud of you." Tony nodded enthusiastically. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. You showed that horrible man exactly who you really are." Sarah hugged them both tightly. These were the people who had supported her through the hardest months of her life. They had believed in her when she almost stopped believing in herself. Mr. Peterson approached with a big smile on his face. "Sarah, I have a proposition for you," he said. "Dr. Chun tells me you'll be going back to school soon, but you'll still need some income. How would you feel about playing piano here on Friday and Saturday evenings? I'll pay you 3 times what you make as a waitress, and you can set your own schedule around your classes." Sarah could hardly believe how much her life was changing in one evening. "You really want me to play here regularly?" she asked. "After what I just witnessed, I'd be crazy not to," Mr. Peterson replied. "That performance will be talked about for years. People will come here just hoping to hear you play again." As the evening wound down and the last customers left, Sarah finally had a moment to process everything that had happened. She walked back to the piano and sat down on the bench one more time. The beautiful instrument that had seemed so unreachable. Just hours before now felt like an old friend. Dr. Chun approached her quietly. "You know," he said, "what happened tonight was about much more than music. You showed incredible courage and dignity under very difficult circumstances. Those qualities will serve you well as a professional musician." Sarah nodded, understanding what he meant. The music had been important, but her decision to face Marcus's cruelty with grace and strength had been equally significant. She had refused to let someone else's meanness diminish her dreams or her sense of self-worth. 2 years later, Sarah performed her debut solo concert at Carnegie Hall in New York City.